Pay attention, people.
Years ago,
Ready to know what aliens are?
back in 1972, I was sitting at my desk at about 4:30 in the morning at the headquarters of the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Pacific Fleet, arranging the information that had come in over the last 24 hours into a logical order so that we could prepare a briefing for the Admiral and his staff, which would take place later that morning. Among the papers I found on my desk was a document entitled Operation Majority, and it was not the entire paperwork involving this operation, but was merely a synopsis of the operation and projects contained under it. One of these projects was called Project Red Light. The purpose, according to this document, was to back engineer captured extraterrestrial technology for adaptation into the United States space program. Now, I have since come to believe that the extraterrestrial portion of all of this is nonsense, but that the technology is real. I believe that many of us were shown these documents over the years so that later we would talk about it. I mean, how can you keep the existence of extraterrestrials, if they were real, a secret? And how could anyone keep quiet knowing that they had seen documentation, official government documents labeled top secret, that expressed that these extraterrestrials were real and had visited this earth? I wanted to know just how true all of this was, and I began a program of research to find out if extraterrestrials were real. The first thing I did was collect every bit of documentation that I could find, both from the Freedom of Information Act, from the research of others, from books that had been printed on the subject of UFOs, and of course through my network of friends in the intelligence community. What I discovered was amazing. What I discovered, ladies and gentlemen, is that there has been a plan in existence since about 1917, and probably before that, to create an artificial extraterrestrial threat to this earth in order to create a one-world totalitarian socialist government. One of the first documents that I found in my search was this one, the Imperial Japanese Mission 1917, a record of the reception throughout the United States of the special mission headed by Viscount Ishii. And when the Imperial Japanese Mission was in New York.
Why are we here? What is it we're seeking to achieve? We're here to break barriers because free people are capable of extraordinary things. This isn't just theory, it's history. For thousands of years, the human experience was full of misery, death, disease, abject poverty. Across the world, ruling classes controlled everyone else. They put up barriers that block progress in nearly all aspects of life. But then a series of events converged that started to liberate the masses. When Gutenberg invented the printing press in 1440, it gave people access to information and greater opportunities to think for themselves. William Tyndale translated the Bible from Latin, the language of the elites, into English. Those in power burned him at the stake for this act. But he succeeded in enabling far more people to be able to interpret religion for themselves. This created the conditions for the Reformation. New ideas began to take root. People like Galileo and Newton challenged authorities, which led to unprecedented scientific breakthroughs and progress for society. Events like this paved the way for the Dutch Golden Age. The Dutch created a relatively tolerant society for their time, and barriers continued to crumble. People like John Locke, Descartes, and thousands of religious refugees made it their home. Holland grew into a flourishing marketplace of ideas. In addition to scientific progress, like the invention of the microscope, economic progress was encouraged by the protection of private property rights. More people had more freedom, and for the first time ever, merchants, artisans, and working people were respected and rewarded for their work. Trade exploded, and Holland became the most prosperous country in the world. And finally, in the 18th century, the liberalism that led to Holland's wealth began to spread to other countries. In America, the ideals of a free society were reflected in the Declaration of Independence. It articulated a vision for a society where citizens would be treated equally under the law and provided the freedom to flourish. What ensued has been a period of unprecedented worldwide growth, known as the Great Enrichment, depicted here as a hockey stick of human progress. By some measures, Americans' standard of living has risen by close to 3,000% over the last 2 centuries alone. This shows what happens when barriers are removed. Ideas can flow, and people can have the freedom to innovate, succeed, and drive progress. But sadly, not all people have gained that freedom. Since our founding, the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness has not been equally applied to everyone. African Americans and Native Americans were given no rights. Women and immigrants were only given partial rights, and certain religious groups were persecuted, just to name a few. Through our history, it's taken courageous individuals who built inspiring movements of millions of people to break these barriers one by one. From the abolitionist movement, to the women's rights movement, to the civil rights movement, these movements have helped our country move closer to the ideals of the Declaration of Independence. But we have a ways to go. Today, our society continues to be plagued by a rigged system of cronyism, dependency, and control. We have a two-tiered society that creates welfare for the wealthy and crushes opportunities for the disadvantaged. The barriers this system has created make it nearly impossible for many Americans to learn, contribute, and succeed. It's the injustice of our time, and it has to stop. By partnering with an ever-growing coalition of collaborators from all walks of life, we can truly become a movement of millions that drives societal transformation. This will bring about a system of equal rights and mutual benefit, where people are motivated to help one another. This will not be easy, but what we face is nothing compared to what our historical counterparts faced before us. Their stories prove that dedicated, courageous individuals uniting together with shared principles and a common vision can break barriers. And when they do, free people will achieve extraordinary things. That, in my opinion, is why we're here. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
New York City, they had a dinner and some pretty famous people spoke at this dinner. One of them was John Dewey. John Dewey is the father of our failing, disastrous public education system. Here's what he said. Listen very carefully. John Dewey, professor of philosophy in Columbia University, who was the next speaker, was listened to with great intentness. He said, quote, "Someone remarked that the best way to unite all the nations on this globe would be an attack from some other planet. In the face of such an alien enemy, people would respond with a sense of their unity of interest and purpose." Unquote. Now, bear in mind, folks, that's 1917. One of the next documents that I found, and I found quite a few, but one that's pretty important is called the Report from Iron Mountain. the probability and desirability of permanent peace. Now, I encourage you to find this book, wherever you can find it. I don't know where you can get it, but find it. Page 66. Credibility, in fact, lies at the heart of the problem of developing a political substitute for war. This is where the space race proposals, in many ways so well suited as economic substitutes for war, fall short. The most ambitious and unrealistic space project cannot of itself generate a believable external menace. It has been hotly argued that such a menace would offer the last best hope of peace, etc., by uniting mankind against the danger of destruction by creatures from other planets or from outer space. Experiments have been proposed to test the credibility of an out-of-our-world invasion threat. And it continues on another page. Nevertheless, an effective political substitute for war would require alternate enemies, some of which might seem equally far-fetched in the context of the current war system. It may be, for instance, that gross pollution of the environment can eventually replace the possibility of mass destruction by nuclear weapons as the principal substitute for war. Are you beginning to get the message, folks? Poisoning of the air and of the principal sources of food and water supply is already well advanced, and at first glance would seem promising in this respect. It constitutes a threat that can be dealt with only through social organization and political power. But from present indications, it will be a generation to a generation and a half before environmental pollution, however severe, will be sufficiently menacing on a global scale to offer a possible basis for a solution. However unlikely some of the possible alternate enemies we have mentioned may seem, we must emphasize that one must be found of credible quality and magnitude if a transition to peace is ever to come about without social.
I'm educated. I'm bringing a career to the table. Why am I wrong if I require a brother to match my efforts as a prerequisite to marriage?
I'm glad you came out.
I have to see him again to know if it's real. I know you don't like this, Nuri. This is what love looks like.
Social disintegration. It is more probable, in our judgment, that such a threat will have to be invented rather than developed from unknown conditions. Ladies and gentlemen, they have created so many alternate enemies in order to bring about their one-world totalitarian socialist state that we don't know which enemy to believe is real or is false, or whether to just toss them all out on their ears. And I think that that is probably going to be the best solution. Disarmament is no accident. All of these bills in Congress to take away our weapons is no accident. The intentional environmental pollution of our lakes, rivers, streams, oceans, forests, everything is no accident, as you just heard. These things were planned many, many years ago. All the bombardment of the public with movies about flying saucers in the 50s, right after the United Nations Treaty was signed and the UN Participation Act was pushed through Congress, and all of the incidents since that have convinced the majority of the American people that flying saucers are real and extraterrestrials exist, and that flying saucers are from an extraterrestrial origin. This is being promulgated in many ways, by television commercials, in the movies, in the newspapers, by creating incidents either real or imagined. I believe, because of my research, because of the extensive documentation that I've found in my book, that this whole scenario has been created to give us an artificial alien threat from outer space. During the Reagan administration, he made 6 speeches, specifically talked about a threat from outer space by some other species from some other planet. 6, ladies and gentlemen. Why would the president repeat the same thing 6 times, tagged on to the ends of speeches by him? The speechwriters did not put that in the speech. Ronald Reagan added it himself.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Still got that one.
And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?
This was a powerful suggestion to implant into the minds of the people of the world that there really is a threat from some other species, from some other planet to this Earth. Now, you people out there have been ignoring the UFO phenomenon for too long. It has all the earmarks of the most successful, most sophisticated mind control operation in the history of the world, and you are ignoring it. What better way to implement a plan to bring about a one-world government than to create the possibility in the minds of the people of the world that we are being threatened from some other species, from some other planet, and
Oh God, no wonder I kept getting commercials.
Nailed it. And she looks great.
Son of a bitch. Sorry guys. I wasn't here to skip through the commercials, sorry.
do it in a way that if anybody questions it or challenged it or wants to talk about it publicly, that they are ridiculed.
And the ultimate goal is to make the Earth look very small, to present the people of the world with an external threat to this Earth, a superior race from some other planet, vastly superior to us in intellect, philosophy, and technology, in order to cause the dissolution of nation states, the dissolution of all existing religions, and the formation of the world totalitarian socialist government.
Not many years ago, I get a document, the next one, which is chilling. It's never been shown. It's from the Strategic Studies Institute, think tank, and it's dated 1995. And it was talking about all kinds of global security strategies. And, you know, you can look at it yourself. Cult programmed graduates, blah, 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 who will be expected to participate in contrived UFO abduction scenarios. Listen carefully. Create a global UFO cult, which will involve, this is what needs to be done in order to actuate this false flag operation, that will involve the abduction of citizens so as to foster an illusion that this Earth is facing an extraterrestrial invasion. UFO abductees of preference will have an experience in computer technologies, since that expertise will be required in future technocratic RMA scenarios. Use of experimental drugs, holographic projection capabilities, directed energy technologies, I'll get into that in a moment, induced auditory input. These are the neurophones I mentioned that Werner von Braun said the most dangerous thing is the neurophone, non-local things that can be done to make people think they're having an experience when they're not. Input experimental aircraft, well, that's just a euphemism for man-made UFOs, and special effects costuming and stagecraft, among other things, will be used to persuade the abductees of the reality of their circumstances.
They can do this.
Official denials regarding these events will employ reverse psychology to ensure that all such denials are taken as official confirmation of an imminent and or ongoing extraterrestrial invasion. This is the next page. UFO abductees will be worship. UFO cult networks will be controlled by U.S. intelligence to limit infiltration and ensure that dissidents do not disrupt UFO long-term agendas. Uncontrollable dissidents will be assassinated, preferably by directed energy means. Dissociative satanic cult graduates will handle all such executions, i.e., when not actively lending logical and theatrical support.
Oh, the Satanist gonna kill us.
UFO abduction operations.
Nice.
Number 3, directed energy surveillance and weapons technology of all types and caps will be used for purposes of spreading fear and confusion in the population at large under deniable circumstances. for eliminating persons deemed adversarial to U.S. national security interests and for spotting, assessing, and manipulating potential recruits to the RMA cause. Neurocybernetics and other psychotechnologies will be used to sow confusion and hypochondria in the population. The symptoms and effects produced by these and other directed energy technologies will parallel the effects produced by various microbes, viruses, and chemical imbalances, thus compelling a large segment of society to seek medical intervention, which in turn will be a basis for their being used for medical experimentation under voluntary circumstances. Psychiatrists and psychologists will play an important role in these experiments, particularly where denying the efficacy of neurocybernetics psychotechnologies is concerned. Citizens who complain of hearing voices will be used as a basis for generously government-funded schizophrenic-related brain research, on and on and on. It goes on.
Bingo! Alright, sorry, hopefully you skipped through the commercials. I mean, that thing, they just lay it out perfectly right there. I couldn't say it better or do it better, so there you go. I love you all. Don't forget, this is an agenda that's been going on for 100 years just on this. But the agenda of what they've been getting to has been going on for a lot longer. Stand up and resist, my brothers and sisters. I love you all.